So I like to make sure when we go into games while covering the Browns that there is a perspective that is heard from people who are more familiar with their team than they are necessarily the Cleveland Browns. Because, just like I might know some stuff coming into a game that maybe not a lot of people are hip to about the Browns and how this team's going, other people from other cities and teams and fan bases might also be able to provide that same perspective. So I brought on Matt O'Leary from the YouTube channel, Matt O'Leary NY. Make sure you go check it out. Matt, how do you guys feel about this game going up against the Cleveland Browns this week?
Well, for me personally, before the season started, I was a little happy that the Jets got the Browns earlier in the year because I figured, okay, it'd be without Watson, which is still the case. But losing Zach Wilson and then watching Joe Flacco last week has really tempered any expectation that I have. I am scared to death of what Myles Garrett could potentially do to Joe Flacco, who is a statue in the pocket at this point in his career. So I'm a little nervous there. I'm not going to lie to you.
It's interesting because Mike White has a bit of a fan base in the North, the AFC North, because he beat the Bengals last year, had that incredible game. And there's a running joke amongst all of us. It's like, hey, there's balance these AFC North teams want to do of making Joe Flacco look bad enough to lose, but not necessarily making him look so bad that he gets benched and Mike White comes into the game because you feel like he could provide more problems for him. But, with Joe Flacco, he used to be really good at getting rid of the ball to not get sacked. He's just not that guy anymore. From what I've seen, the last two stops he had in Denver, now in New York. And then I look at your guys' offensive line situation. Now, fortunately, Fant did practice today, so you're not going to be down to the practice squad guy that you guys just signed there at left tackle. What's the plan there if you're Robert Saleh to do anything about Myles Garrett?
Yeah, I mean, easier said than done. I assume George Fant is going to be good enough to play. He was really good at left tackle last year. Obviously, when Mekhi Becton went down, he moved over to the left side and played really well. The plan originally for this year was for him to come in, be the left tackle, and Mekhi be the right tackle this year. But then Mekhi gets hurt. They signed Dwayne Brown. So George Fant moved to the right side, and now he's back to the left side. So the point being, he was moved around a lot this summer, and it looked like he struggled in week one against the Ravens pass rush. So my guess would be that I think you're going to put a tight end over on that side of the line, whether it be Uzama, Conklin, or someone like that to help. And I think you're going to have to mix in some double teams there because you look at what Myles Garrett can do. He's someone who could wreck a game for you. And with this team too, and you mentioned Joe Flacco not being able to get the ball out very quickly. That was an issue last week. If I'm the Jets offensive coordinator, Mike LaFleur, I'm trying to scheme up a way to get the ball out quick, whether it's little wide receiver screens or utilizing Breece Hall and Michael Carter out of the backfield in the short to intermediate stuff. And trying to get away from some of those longer developing plays because, like we said earlier, I think we can get Joe Flacco killed.
Yeah, I was watching the tape on the first game you guys had this year against Baltimore. One of the things that stood out because I don't think there was a lot of talk about the offensive line play. One of the things that stood out to me was Laken Tomlinson was just not himself. Is there any reason why he was? Because Justin Matabuki was in his chest all game. Is there any reason why that was happening? Has this been a consistent thing in camp where people have been worried about him, or do you guys think this is more of an aberration?
No, that seemed pretty fluky. Like he had a pretty good camp. I'm kind of just chalking it up to the offensive line didn't get a ton of reps in preseason working together with the number of injuries that they had, and they had guys moving around. So normally he's someone who's very, very good in the run game. Luckily, last week I think the one who shined on the offensive line was Elijah Vera Tucker, who recently moved over to right guard. I think he's going to be fine right now. And I think Tomlinson's going to be fine too, but the tackles worry me because Fant was a little inconsistent. And obviously last year he showed he was a good player, but week one struggled. Last week you also had Max Mitchell, who's a fourth round rookie this year, starting at right tackle. Wasn't supposed to play. He was supposed to be someone who like a draft and stash and maybe develop kind of guy. He held up pretty strong in week one, but I'm by no means sold on that. So the line is definitely something that I'll be keeping a close eye on this week.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting too because the Browns like to move both Clowney and Miles kind of almost sometimes in unison, and I'm wondering which side are they going to pick to attack because it would make a lot of sense for them to try to overload that side where Max Mitchell is and just like try to confuse the young player. And I don't know how I would feel. Fourth round pick wasn't expected to play, and I'm trying to get in my set, and there's Miles Garrett on one shoulder and Jadeveon Clowney on the other shoulder. Are there any other players on the defensive side of the ball that the Jets are specifically kind of concerned about as far as those players being able to wreck their game plan other than the defensive line and Miles?
Not like you mentioned Clowney, like, and that's another one. Like, I just look at to me, the biggest matchup is the trenches here, the offensive lines versus the defensive lines. Not like overly concerned necessarily with the interior of the defensive line. I think if there's a way for the Jets to remain competitive in this game, I think the best way to do that is to try to run the ball up the middle. I know that's a little cliche and a little boring, but I think if they can keep this kind of a low scoring, grinded out game, I think that's their best chance and best path if they're to pull an upset this week.
Now, they threw the ball 60 times last week. And I know that game was close in the first half, so I'm wondering, like, what was that about? What was that game plan? Like, what were they trying to accomplish? What did the coaches say about that number? That's an egregious number in regulation. I mean, Joe Burrow was he usually is top of the league in attempts. He played a whole extra period, 53. So how did they explain that?
Yeah, that was bizarre. I think to put it lightly. It was funny I don't know if it was exactly the post game or a day or two later, but Mike LaFleur came out and was like, that sucked, looking at the box score and seeing how many times that Joe Flacco threw the ball was the exact quote. And early on, like, it was a 10-3 game going into halftime, and I think Flacco had 24 attempts in the first half, which even that, like, pacing out to 48 is still way too high for Joe Flacco. You want him throwing the ball 30, 35 times max. I don't want him throwing any more than that. And the run game was okay early on. Like, Michael Carter was averaging like 5-6 yards a carry. Breece Hall has been a little up and down in training camp, and he struggled a little bit in week one. I think it might take him a little bit of time before he really hits his stride. But based on what we saw last week, where they're throwing the ball 60 times, which is just absurd, I almost think they go a complete 180 and try to really, put multiple tight ends on the field and try to run the ball.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting, like, game plan for them because one of the things I think the Browns are actually really good at, people haven't caught up on, is they're very athletic going laterally, right? I think they struggle sometimes when you push them vertically, and that's where they have communication breakdowns. If you saw the game last week, there were two big vertical breakdowns with Robbie Anderson on the Palms play, and then there was another one in just regular, cover two, where they just blew the seam. So that sometimes can be an issue for the Browns, but like laterally, because I know a lot, like the Panthers tried to attack the Browns with with screens a lot, and that's just, it doesn't work just because Miles can get to the edge real fast and then he can make a play on it. It's interesting because you mentioned running up the middle. That's where you want to attack the Browns if you want to attack them, especially in that run game. You don't want to really test the edges and test the speed there, not necessarily because of just Miles, but just the speed that they have at linebacker. JOK is certainly an interesting player. How you feel about these wide receivers? I know there's been some weird stuff with Garrett Wilson, like up and down the depth chart. Looked like his snap count was pretty normal though for a player drafted in that position. I think he got like 25, 30 snaps or something like that. Correct me if I'm wrong, but
yeah, it was. I was a little surprised that he didn't get more playing time. The snap numbers went up in the second half. He really wasn't utilized a lot in the first half, and he still ended up with 4 catches and 52 yards, which is a pretty good, pretty nice day, all things considering. Corey Davis had a nice game box score wise, but had a really bad drop early in the game and struggled with drops last year. For me, I really think the Jets should be utilizing Garrett Wilson and Elijah Moore for their speed in this game. And even Braxton Berrios, who's, more of a depth guy and special teamer. He has really reliable hands. And I think he was someone who's really underrated last year. And they're all three of those guys that I just mentioned, they have pretty good speed. So I don't necessarily look at this game and think this is a game where like a receiver like Corey Davis might shine or break out. I think it's more, the guys with some speed. And like you mentioned earlier, the Browns defense gave up a deep shot last week to Robbie Anderson. Maybe you take a shot early in the game with one of your younger guys in Elijah Moore or Garrett Wilson and see if you could, back this defense off a little bit.
All right, let's flip sides of the ball here. Let's talk about the Jets' defensive matchups versus the Cleveland Browns. Some interesting players here, some familiar names here. C.J. Mosley, Carl Lawson for people who follow the North. But also, there's some interesting names here. Jermaine Johnson was somebody I liked his Senior Bowl stuff a lot. I was shocked that he actually ended up being a first-round pick because it was no buzz about that at the Senior Bowl. But Solomon Thomas, Quentin Williams, I think the corners are really interesting here, right? DJ Reed, really good player coming out of Seattle. And then Sauce Gardner, it would seem to appear that he's been pretty close to his advertised as a really good day one corner. I felt like he should have been the first corner taken. It ended up being Derek Stingley. But I really like Sauce coming out of Cincinnati. Do you guys feel like that secondary is the strength of the defense?
Definitely the cornerback room. Safety, definitely not outside of Jordan Whitehead. So you're right. Like, as good as advertised for Sauce Gardner, came into camp right away, looked the part, was good all preseason, was very good in week one. DJ Reed is someone, he's just solid, steady, lockdown, good number two guy. Safety, Jordan Whitehead, if he's good to go, he's a little banged up this week. I like his ability to come up and make plays at the line of scrimmage, which I think would help in a game like this where, the Browns like to run the ball and they have a good 1-2 punch. But LaMarcus Joyner was awful in week one. He had a really bad penalty, and then he was the reason for the big play to, I think it was Rashad Bateman last week. And outside of that, they have very little depth beyond. So if Whitehead can't go, you're looking at Ashton Davis, who's a 2023 round pick, who is a converted track star. He was a track star at Cal, and just to say the football IQ is still not up to speed might be putting it nicely. And then beyond that, they called up Will Parks off the practice squad, who had a pretty nice camp, but I don't know if he's someone that you trust playing starting level snaps. So you're really praying that Whitehead's good to go, because if not, that could be really rough.
It's going to be interesting there, and interesting you bring up Ashton Davis. We have our own Ashton Davis on the Cleveland Browns called Anthony Schwartz. He's a fast guy, not necessarily know how good he is at football, though. There's those players are always frustrating sometimes. Now, your edges, I think, are interesting. John Franklin Myers, especially Carl Lawson. I've noticed, I think one of the reasons you guys are better in run defense is that he really didn't get that many snaps against the run. And I know Carl, he's kind of one of those players that will chase the dog, right? He's going to go after the ball, and that sometimes that can make him really susceptible to be ran at in some of these zone schemes. So what's that rotation at edge rusher like, and how are they utilizing that rotation to make sure they're better against the run this year?
Yeah, so they really rotate the defensive line a lot, which is something that Robert Saleh did in San Francisco. And this year, what I think makes a difference is they have a deeper room in both the interior and on the edge, because last year, Carl Lawson was done for the year. They had Bryce Huff was a good rotational guy who was injured and missed most of last year. But Carl Lawson looked good in week one. John Franklin Myers is someone who I think is one of the more underrated players in the NFL. He can play on the outside or kick in on the inside. And I think he's honestly at his best when he is inside with Quinn and Williams. The two of them rushing in the middle, I think, is really impressive. Jermaine Johnson is, someone who's going to rotate in, kind of like, the best way that I could explain it is on passing downs. They're definitely going to have John Franklin Myers inside and Jermaine Johnson on the outside. But on situations where early, like first and long and stuff like that, they would more likely have guys like Jermaine Johnson out, have John Franklin Myers on the outside, and then maybe a bigger guy like Sheldon Rankins or Solomon Thomas inside. So they rotate a lot. They like to keep their guys fresh. And what I was impressed with was the speed. I think they play very quickly. And the linebackers too. I know you didn't mention them, but the linebackers, they showed some really good speed in week one. And the addition of Quan Alexander, I think, really helped.
Yeah, so what do you think the Jets have to do to kind of win this game from your perspective? What do you think what are the weaknesses if you're the Jets, you're trying to make sure that you force the Browns into?
Yeah, so for the Jets, I think it comes to stopping the run. I would load up the box and say, all right, Jacoby Brissett, try to beat me deep. Try to, throw your way into the game. He had like, what was it, 145 passing yards last week or something like that.
It's something like that.
Brissett did. Yeah. Um, which like he's a fine backup, but it's a situation kind of similar that the Jets are in. They're playing their backup quarterback, a veteran who you probably don't want throwing a ton. And obviously, we know that Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb that is a great 1-2 punch. And obviously, I think you're going to look to try to run the ball. So I'm loading up the box. I'm bringing Jordan Whitehead down towards the line of scrimmage, playing one safety high, and saying, "All right, try to beat us down the field." We have Sauce Gardner on the outside, and we have DJ Reed on the outside, and Michael Carter in the slot, who's actually pretty good himself. Beat us with your wide receivers. I think that would be the way to do it. And look, you're putting a lot of pressure on a rookie in Sauce Gardner, but I think he's up to the test.
And then offensively, to attack this Browns defense, what do you think is a successful plan for them?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it a little bit earlier, but I think running specifically up the middle is the way to do it. You mentioned that the speed on the edge is not ideal. And obviously, I think that you're going to have to try to take a couple of shots up the field a little bit. Maybe utilize the tight ends to do that a little bit more. The Jets brought in two tight ends in free agency in CJ Uzama and Tyler Conklin. Most people know the name Uzama from, obviously he was from the AFC North, so I'm sure you're very familiar with him. But Tyler Conklin in the preseason in camp honestly looked like the better of the two, and I think he's the sneaky one that you got to watch. He had a touchdown in garbage time last week, but he's someone who I would circle because quarterbacks, whether it be Wilson in the preseason or if Flacco or White, on third down situations, he was one of the guys that they were looking for. So I think he might be a sneaky guy that you want to keep a close eye on.
I wonder if Tyler's related to Jack.
Yeah, I don't know, honestly.
They both
That's a
went
good
to
point.
Michigan schools, right? So I would assume is such, but I can't find anything that confirms it because Jack might be back this week. But yeah, that's going to be interesting. How do you feel? I'm not going to ask you for a prediction. Obviously, it's going to just set you up to get horrible comments. But how do you feel as a fan about the Jets' ability to win this game? Do you think this is one that they can win or should win?
Should win is probably a stretch. Yeah, I mean, at any given Sunday, right? I don't think this is a game like I don't see either team blowing them out. I think it'll be a low scoring game. Like I think the point total is like 39.5. The sportsbooks have it as. So I think you're looking at like 20-17 kind of game, and you have to be able to minimize mistakes. Last week, the special teams was awful. Their punter shanked a 20-yard punt. Greg Zuerlein missed an extra point and missed a field goal. Like you obviously can't have stuff like that happen. So I think they have to play like a sound game and hope that Flacco can get the ball out quicker. And I think you'll have a shot. Like I said, I would be surprised if either of these teams blow each other out. I know the Browns are almost a touchdown favorite, but I think it's probably going to be like, I don't know, a 2017, 23-20 kind of game.
I always say when people are like, "Hey, what are you gonna do to stop the Browns' run game?" Load the box, and I'm like, "They've been loading the boxes for 4 years, man." It's always, or it's when it's Miles, it's we're gonna double team them, and it's like, everybody does it. Sometimes the Ravens triple team them. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. We'll see what happens this week. Browns home opener against the Jets. It's an exciting matchup. I think the Jets have a much, much, much better defense than I think people are kind of assuming right now. I think that'll show itself to be true. It's just this offensive side, Joe Flacco. Even when Zach Wilson's out there, I'm not 100% confident in what level of quarterback play he's eventually going to develop into. And there are some young, promising pieces on that wide receiver side, but it's just so many questions there, and so it's a lot of optimism that you would have to rely on in order to kind of feel like this is going to be the year for them. But it is an interesting team to keep an eye on, nonetheless. But again, thank you for coming on. Appreciate your time. Anything else you want to say before you get out?
Yeah, hopefully, hopefully it's a fun game. Appreciate you having me on. If you want to follow along, Matt O'Leary NY on YouTube and anywhere on social media. We're talking New York Jets and football and just trying to keep it light.
Definitely, definitely. You guys check it out. Appreciate you. Everybody else, have a great day. Have a good night.